Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time it is, wherever you are. Welcome to a special episode of the CDO Matters podcast. This is a special episode because it probably won't be released within our usual 2-week cycles because we want to talk about something a little bit different. Today, it's kind of a little bit more of a niche focus today. It's not a broad appeal, so that's why we're calling it a special episode. A few other disclaimers before we begin. One is apologies in advance for my less than stellar audio and video settings. I'm in a temporary setup here. I don't think I've talked about this in the podcast yet, but they're ripping apart my house. We're doing a major renovation. So I am kind of duct taping together my audio and video setup. Disclaimers abound, but thanks for your patience. I'm joined today by Mr. Christopher Dwight, who is the VP of Strategic Initiatives at my company, at Profisee, also known as CD. CD is an expert in MDM. He's been around the block. He knows his stuff. He's worked for a number of key vendors. CD, you may not know this, but last week, I don't know why, but maybe this is just my ego talking. I was in ChatGPT and I asked ChatGPT, who are some noted experts in MDM? And guess whose name was number one?
No.
You.
No.
Yeah. Your name came up first.
No, it had to be you.
I think it is what it is because like my vanity was assuming I'm going to be. I wasn't even in the top five. I wasn't even on the top five.
Yeah.
But you, my friend, were number one. So obviously the GPTs think you know your stuff. I know you know your stuff, and many others that you've worked with over the years know you know your stuff. So we're going to talk a little bit about MDM. But we're gonna take a pretty broad approach because we're gonna talk specifically about quick service restaurants, also known as QSRs. I don't know a lot of human beings who haven't done business with a quick service restaurant. Yeah. I mean, if you've ever driven through a drive-through, if you've ever eaten at a restaurant while you're standing up, perhaps potentially, or I mean, I think there's plenty of quick serve that have seating, of course, but this is a long-winded way of saying. This is an industry that is near and dear to everybody because I think in our modern day and times we're all going to quick serve restaurants. So let's start with kind of a generic kind of focus here. When we think about this industry, CD, what are some of the things that are top of mind for data practitioners? Now, of course, this is a podcast about data, so we're going to talk about data.
Yep.
What are some things that are near and dear for data practitioners at these quick serve restaurants?
Almost all quick serve restaurants are operated under a franchise model. So right there, you introduce a certain level of complexity between corporate, who is managing a lot of the core data and kind of driving the direction of the brand, and then individual franchisees who may have multiple stores. It's not necessarily a single franchisee per store. Many times there are even small companies or businesses that run these stores, but they're franchisees. And so there's necessarily a dichotomy between what corporate is doing and what the franchisees are doing, between corporate systems and direction, and then propagating any kind of changes in the direction or driving the brand and the business, propagating that out across franchisees. That's kind of the core fundamental challenge that affects a lot of the data issues or the data challenges that I see when I engage with these quick service restaurants. So that's kind of like the foundation of why is this hard in the first place? The other kind of foundational thing is that these are evolving, right? You and I have been around a while. Menus used to be static. They'd actually have to go out to the drive-through and physically change and update the menus, in print. At the drive-through or on the banners above the point of sale. And of course, everything's moved to now digital menus almost exclusively. But on top of that, there's also a lot of now third-party engagement that also need to have information about things like menus and pricing and promotions. That's things like DoorDash and Uber Eats and Grubhub and all these other third parties now that are operating and integrating with these quick service restaurants. That adds yet even a third layer, right? So we've got corporate, we've got franchisees, and now we have this whole ecosystem of third parties out there that are providing delivery services and helping to drive sales. Those are the things I think that are kind of set the stage for why data management has become more and more complex for quick service restaurants.
And I have to think that layered on top of that. So that's, I love that as a foundational layer, especially from this perspective of, for lack of a better word, tension. Maybe I'll use the word tension. I don't know if that's the right word or not.
I think there's probably
tension between like headquarters and what corporate wants and the economies of scale that corporate is trying to drive from a menu management perspective, from, I assume, from a customer data management perspective, and on and on. But then there is what the franchisee wants to do, and a certain, and I assume if you're running a small business, you want to have a certain degree of autonomy and a certain degree of flexibility around what you put on the menu, what you don't put on the menu, your interactions with corporate vis-a-vis acquisition of stuff. So like that is a foundational kind of baseline. I really like that, because in my conversations with data leaders, I mean, I don't like that there's tension, but I like understanding that from a framing perspective, because if you kind of understand that there is this tension, it just adds a degree of complexity and a degree of challenge here for, if you are that corporate person who's responsible for managing a menu, that means, a lot of challenges, right? How do you make sure that you are having some consistency there? Because from a corporate perspective, that's where the economies are, is consistency in managing these things. So what's a common problem? I already mentioned menu management. How does that kind of manifest, like a challenge related to the data, related to managing everything that you put on your menu? How does that kind of manifest from a data quality and maybe an MDM perspective?
Yeah, there's a couple of things to touch on there. And, I think, for just a lay person, you think menu management, well, how hard can it be to put a new cheeseburger on the marquee board or on the digital sign? But it's a lot more than that, of course. When you talk about any kind of changes to the products that are going to be served, you have to consider not just the products that are going to be presented to the consumer. You've got to be thinking about, well, first of all, what is the data necessary to support the various platforms? They're going to need that new product. So I've got my digital signage and menus, both indoor and outdoor. I've got my third parties that I'm going to have to sync that with. And then the next layer down is you also have to understand all of the ingredients that go into that new item. And there's two big reasons for that. One, you've got to make sure that those ingredients can be delivered to the store so they can actually make the new item, right? If there's some unique ingredient, or hey, we're expecting sales of this to increase, so now we're going to have to increase the amount of cheese that we order every week. All those detailed ingredients have to be understood, and then that has to be propagated to their entire supply chain and delivery. That's something that often corporate helps the franchisees with in managing, but that all has to be propagated and distributed so that the franchisees can not only list the new menu item, but actually get the products and ingredients that they need to make the new item. And there's a lot of complexity when you start thinking about that, because different ingredients are going to be sourced from different suppliers. And sometimes those are going to be sourced from different suppliers regionally. And so it may be that we're buying, pounds and pounds of cheddar cheese, and now we're going to need to change the quantities because of some new menu items. But stores in the Southeast might be getting that cheese from one supplier, and stores in New England might be getting it from another. And so all of that has to be kind of distributed and propagated. So there's where some of the complexity starts to come in. The other side of it is, go ahead.
No. This is classic MDM. I love it. Please finish.
It's always about peeling the onion, right? It's like when you think about it, hey, how hard can it be to put a cheeseburger for $4.99 on a menu board, right? Well, as soon as you start really digging in, what has to happen to actually allow the franchisee to not just have that listed, put it into their point of sale, and be able to transact on it, they've got to be able to make it, right? So that's one of the first layers. The second piece of complexity is there's a lot of regulatory requirements around nutritional and allergen information. And so you've got to understand down to the detail level of everything that's going to go into that new item so that you can handle people who have a gluten or a dairy or some other allergy, and make sure that that information is correct. That is also complicated by the fact that, hey, some suppliers, you've got to make sure that the products you're buying are not produced on the same machinery that works with Brazil nuts, because then you have to list Brazil nuts as a potential allergen, but only for that supplier in the Southeast. So there's again layers and layers of complexity to something as simple as getting a new product available for your franchisees to sell. Just a simple menu change.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of fell down the MDM rabbit hole because of the paradox that exists here. I'm one of those weirdos that is actually attracted by really, really hard problems to solve. And the paradox is exactly what you said. How hard can it be? Right. How hard can it be to add a cheeseburger? But the paradox exists in that, like, you need to have common definitions of what is cheddar cheese, right? What's the fat content in the cheese? How is this sourced? Is this produced in a facility where there are nuts in the facility? All of these things, that's where the complexity comes in. And something as simple as having a common definition for cheese or for nuts or for beef at a national level, where you may not necessarily even be controlling a lot of that data. I think this is probably another thing that is beguiles a lot of people here, in that often I suspect a lot of this data that goes into the supply chain of a quick serve restaurant is coming from providers where that quick serve restaurant, where that headquarters entity may not even have any control over that data, but they still need to make some sort of sense of it and put it into a place where it can be commonly managed. Is that something that you see?
I do. And, models vary by different brands. Some brands, they completely manage the supply chain for their franchisees, right?
Yeah.
So, the franchisees, they're not buying anything directly themselves. They're buying everything through corporate, and that's part of the service that they provide is, end-to-end supply chain management. In those scenarios, there's a lot more control for corporate, but there's still all this complexity because you got to figure out who are the regional suppliers to make this product available, across the entire swath of stores. There could be hundreds of stores and possibly hundreds of suppliers. So that's actually the easier scenario. The harder scenario, some of these brands have a mixed model. There's a whole push for like local ingredients and farm to table and fresh to farm. Even in quick serve, they're trying to jump on that bandwagon, which means that sometimes the supply chain is a hybrid model, that some things are going to be coming from corporate. And it might be something as simple as, branded cups and napkins are coming from corporate, and some key basic ingredients are coming through corporate's supply chain management services. But fresh vegetables and fruits might be sourced more locally by individual franchisees or groups of franchisees. And now things get really complex. And you still have to be able to not just, of course, get those products to all the stores so they can make the new item on your menu, but you also got to then understand all the allergen and nutrition informational. But now it's got a whole nother layer of complexity because corporate doesn't have total control of that. That's actually being somewhat managed, by the individual franchisees. Somehow that data's got to get to corporate so they can ensure that there's compliance and correct reporting on nutrition and allergens. The individual franchisees have to have that information. And so obviously you can imagine there is a ton of data that has to go back and forth to actually just make this work. Right? Hey, I've got this new salad offering that's going to have some fresh strawberries on top with a sweet balsamic vinaigrette, and sounds kind of yummy. But now I've got individual stores and regions that are getting those strawberries locally. I've got to figure all that out and put that together to not just get those products to make the salad, but make sure that every store is accurately reporting nutrition and allergens.
So if you are potentially new to the podcast because you were attracted by something talking about quick serve restaurant, and you may not necessarily be as data geeky as CD and I are, what we're talking about here is classic master data management. So master data is the data that is shared widely across your organization that matters the most to your organization. It is things like your menu, things like your customers, things like your suppliers, things like your corporate assets, and on and on. That data is shared widely across the organization and needs consistent definitions, consistent structure, consistent quality standard. Because what you just heard is that if corporate calls a napkin one thing, but if your franchisees calls a napkin something else and they don't have a common definition on it, they're not even speaking the same language. Yeah. And this is really what MDM does, is it establishes a common language across the organization so that we know what we're producing and we know the suppliers that are giving us all the raw materials to go into that. We know who our customers are.
Yep.
I mean, this idea of not even necessarily even knowing who our customers are is a real problem at extremely large companies. So, CD, what you described is effective MDM. But what are you seeing for quick serve restaurants that don't do MDM? How are they solving these problems? just a lot of trading in Excel spreadsheets? How are they doing this?
Yeah, the irony, Malcolm, is, we work for a master data management vendor that creates software to help make master data management easy. But the reality is everybody's doing master data management.
Yeah.
Some of them just aren't doing it very well, or they're doing it in highly manual ways that are slow, that are tedious, and more importantly, error prone, right? That to me, the big challenge is, hey, it takes us 4 or 5 weeks to get a new menu item out because we're passing all this data back and forth through spreadsheets or through some kind of hey, there's a table there that everybody has to go access on the corporate system to get some of the information they need in order to update their menu. These processes, everybody masters or manages their master data. It's just many times they're not doing it well. They're doing it with ad hoc, manual-based processes. A ton of times it's somehow leveraging Excel, right? That is the business application of default, right? When you have no other system, what do? You put it in Excel. And so everybody is doing this. But again, the challenge is there's delays to market, there's unnecessary effort, and there's huge opportunities for mistakes to be made. And that's really where bringing some level of automation, bringing some level of governance, some level of control, some centralized place where teams can collaborate to actually bring a new menu item to life. That's where master data management software comes in. And the impacts are big, right? I talked to some of our customers and some of the quick serve customers that I've worked with. They were able to reduce that new menu item introduction from 5-6 weeks down to days. And then if there's just updates or changes to an existing menu item, some of these franchise stores or quick service stores, they're able to distribute those changes to their entire network of restaurants within minutes, like 20 minutes, things that used to take weeks. And so this is, especially you think about all the challenges we've had with widely varying inflation and changes, their stores and corporate are having to make rapid decisions on pricing and changes to pricing based upon the cost of eggs, and that going up and down like a yo-yo. If it takes you weeks to get a pricing change out to all of your franchisees, there is a huge loss of revenue and loss of margin right there, right? You've got to be able to respond to these changes quickly, and manual spreadsheet-based, pick up the phone or swivel chair or email-based master data management just doesn't cut it.
Yeah, that's I hadn't actually thought about that, but the use case that you just highlighted is gold, right? This idea that, maybe gold for one, but maybe not for another. But this idea that the prices of eggs are fluctuating so wildly, like one day they could be $7 a dozen, the next they could be 10. If those prices aren't being updated in real time, that's real money coming out of the pocket of that quick serve restaurant, right? Now, it's up to them whether they want obviously to pass on those costs back to their end consumers. Of course, it's up to them.
Sure.
But knowing and having that visibility that today this egg costs 20% more than it did yesterday is going to be critical to how you manage your business. So, this is a business of scale, right?
Yes.
And this is a business of economies of scale. And if you cannot drive the economies of scale because you think that supplier one only does business with you in the Northeast, and lo and behold, supplier one is doing business with you all across the country, but because you've got a different name for that supplier within your core systems, maybe in one system it's Acme and another one is Acme and Son, and you don't necessarily know that they're the same thing, well, your economies are going to suffer, right? You're going to be paying more than you probably should because you're assuming that you're buying way less than you actually really are. For that given supplier. So
exactly,
economies of scale here are enabled by solid data management under the covers. That's where MDM comes into play.
Well, that just is central to the entire business model, right?
Yeah.
You can go sit down at a fancy restaurant. You're going to pay a heck of a lot more for a meal than you are to quick serve. Consumers expect quick serve restaurants to be affordable. That means there's a ton of pressure on pricing, which means margins are already tight. And so if you are not able to optimize supply chain, if you're not able to predict and propagate changes to pricing, and because of the changing prices to core commodities and ingredients, if you can't do that with agility, you're going to either lose money or lose market share because you're not being responsive to the rapidly changing market. And you mentioned a little earlier about the tension between corporate and franchisees. If it takes corporate 4 weeks to update the core pricing that is going to get applied, and usually it uses the baseline, and then there's like regional variations or boundaries for what franchisees can do, but they have to respond to the core baseline price set by corporate. Well, if your cost of eggs just went up 40% and corporate can't update your baseline pricing for 4 weeks, you're losing money for 4 weeks. And you want to talk about tension between the franchisee and corporate, that's the source of tension, right? So they're dependent upon corporate being nimble. And in order for corporate to be nimble, they need to have strong data management capabilities that are better than spreadsheets, better than email, right? It's just not going to be agile enough or quick enough or accurate enough.
Yeah, and keep in mind, folks, here, we're not talking about pricing software per se. We're talking about the data that identifies the things that you're charging for, right? Yes. The label, literally the label that you use on that raw material, on that ingredient, and that corporate calls it one thing and that the franchisee calls it the same thing. And having consistency on names and having consistency on definitions, that's what MDM does. That's what enables you to automate pricing effectively. Because if you think you're two different things, you're thinking you're dealing with two different things when they're one thing. Well, you can't have consistent pricing. You can't have consistent menu management. You can't even have consistent logistics or procurement. So all these things are enabled by the data. Now, CD, you talked about pricing pressure. Yes. And totally get it. That starts to speak to automation and AI like things. Let's save that for the end, because you can't have a podcast about data these days and not talk about AI. But between now and then, what's another use case here? I've had some really fascinating conversations with quick serve restaurants and others like them. I know, for a matter of fact, there's one oil and gas company, an oil and gas retailer that uses our product simply to better understand their locations and their facilities, and even things like how many parking spaces are in front of the location, and having consistency around that. Talk to me about like location management, opening new locations. What role does an MDM play in helping enable that?
That again, this is where a franchisee that's investing in a new location is basically signing a contract and placing a bet with corporate that, hey, this is going to pay off. It's a big investment. So, one of the things that is critical to that franchisee, whether it's just, one store they're adding to the dozen they already have, or their first store, is how fast can they get to market, time to market. And obviously there's things like construction and these big items that are probably outside of the use cases I see most of the time, but there is a data element to getting new stores up and live and in production quickly. And it is some of the basics, like you said, right? Just core address and contact info and geocodes, and making sure you've got exactly right information on tax authorities and tax rates and all those things. There's software that can help you figure out what are the different local, state, and other sales taxes. But you've got to have the right data for even that stuff to work. Things like, does it have a drive-through? Does it have one drive-through lane or two? Does it have a prepay window and a delivery window, or just a paid delivery window? How many seats? How many parking spots? How many handicap parking spots? All that information is critical. And then all of that also has to be propagated, because, right, I can go up to any kind of quick service restaurant, whether I just pull it up on Google Maps and see some of those details, or maybe I've downloaded their app. And I'm going to go to my quick service app for McDonald's. I'm going to see my local store. I need all of those details on that location. That also goes back to menu. I need all the details of the menu in that app as well. That new store now also needs to get online with any of the delivery services that they're using, any of the third parties like Uber Eats or DoorDash. And so now they've got to have all that information. Plus, I got to have all the correct information for the supply chain. How large is the freezer space? How much refrigerating space do they have? What is the access and what are the limitations for the delivery bay? Can I get a 53-foot truck, or do I need to bring a smaller truck because this is in a downtown cramped location? All that information to basically make the store go. Once it's built, there's a lot of data now that's necessary to actually make that store function and come to life and start selling products. And again, it is terrifying how much that is often done manually. So the use case I see here is, There's a lot of governance that's necessary. This data needs to be accurate in order for everything to work and for everything, the taxes to get paid correctly. There's like compliance issues. You need to understand what are the handicap requirements for that particular state or locale. All these things have real implications. But the biggest thing is, how can I get that store online and effective in producing for that franchisee faster? And as we all know, manual data management is error prone. It leads to delays. It leads to issues. Hey, we think we've got everything ready, but the supplier for all of our frozen goods didn't have the correct information. And now we're going to have to delay the store opening 3 days until we can get that supplier lined up and get everything agreed to and set the schedules. But I've got everything else in the store ready to go except for my frozen. I mean, this is a dilemma, right? And these are the kinds of things that happen when the data is not right.
I recall one story of a company that I've worked with where they were using a local warehouse, right? And where they had the roof height of the warehouse off by like a couple of feet.
Yeah.
But that couple of feet on the roof height ended up equating to millions of dollars every year because they weren't actually able to store as much as they thought they were able to store.
Yeah.
But something as mundane and simple as that, right? Like having common definitions and common access to this data that is shared widely across the organization and have it be accurate. This is another big thing about MDM. It's like, yes, we can lay the plumbing to make sure that you have accurate shared information or that you have shared information related to your menus, your locations.
Yeah.
But accuracy is such an important thing here. Definitions are, but accuracy as well. And one thing that MDM software is really, really good at is when there is a discrepancy, we'll be able to find it, right?
Yeah.
By source of data. You could have, this this location thinks this location thinks that. They're not quite the same. We have facilities vis-a-vis data stewardship UIs to allow you to actually manage and update and maintain that information to make sure it's correct.
Yeah, go ahead. Chime in on that for a second, because I think it's amazing. I've been in this MDM space a really long time, like you have. And when I'm having conversations, especially if I'm talking to like line of business users that are kind of like IT savvy, that are kind of sit in that middle between IT and business, there's still a tremendous misunderstanding of what master data management software does. And I think many times people who are not familiar or only like they only know the name and the acronym, but they don't really understand it, they think it's about deduplication, or they think it's maybe something to do with data quality. It's those things. MDM can help with those things, but you just hit on what I feel is the most fundamental, difficult data challenge that MDM software assists or supports with, and that is discrepancy. Data lives in many places. The list of ingredients and the list of the specific ingredients that go to a menu item, then all these details that go with it. That data is at corporate, at headquarters. That's already going to be in multiple systems, and then you propagate that across to something like a franchisee model where you have some franchise using one point of sale system and others using another. Now this data has to be all these different places. And the biggest, most fundamental, difficult data problem is inconsistency. Something gets updated over at corporate, that gets sent out to the stores. Well, half the stores in Atlanta get updated, but half of them didn't get the data the right way, or something didn't happen correctly. And now their data about that ingredient or an allergen is out of date. That's a huge problem, right? So, hey, a bunch of them have it correct. We managed to keep it harmonized mostly, but mostly is not good enough. And so consistency, harmonization, that is the biggest, most difficult challenge for data today, I think. And that's why master data management is so critical to just making operations work and staying compliant and being efficient.
Yeah. So before we jump on the AI train, one other thing, we've been talking about, menus, and we've been talking about locations. We've been talking about suppliers. Obviously, the most important ingredient, for lack of a better word here, is the customer.
Yeah.
And understanding who that core customer is and building and managing and maintaining a relationship with that customer. So for most QSRs, this results in some sort of idea of a loyalty program or some idea to capture information related to end consumers, the people who are in the restaurants doing the business, and understanding them in a way that goes beyond just an email address. I think email address is kind of like a cover charge these days, but ultimately,
or a mobile number so they can text you, or a mobile number so they can text you.
Right. And good things to have and good things to know and great data to manage. But what I'm seeing is more, right? Understanding more, understanding even things like a household. And where are there multiple people in a single household? And what are the likes? What are the dislikes? What are the deep demographic profiles of these customers? These are the types of things that we need to understand to better serve our customers. So what role do you see MDM playing when it comes to actual consumers of quick serve restaurants?
It's interesting because I feel that's a space that has evolved a lot. And it's evolved because of more and more adoption of people using online and mobile apps as part of their daily lives. My mother is 87 years old and she's starting to use mobile apps for all kinds of things. Like I never thought that would happen, right? But they've gotten so easy to use that my 87-year-old mother is over here pulling up things that she's going to go order or pick up on her mobile phone. So this explosion in adoption of online and mobile apps has created an opportunity to understand customers that really wasn't there 20 or 30 years ago, right? I mean, for the most part, quick service restaurants, it was a point of sale in and out transaction. You had no idea who you were doing business with, right? You tried to drive volume, you tried to do good marketing promotions and just get people through the store, but you didn't know who the heck they were. It was difficult to do anything then. And many were trying to create loyalty programs, but that was often a struggle. So the big opportunity, the shift or change is the fact that, hey, we've got people now that are interacting with both the brand apps and online web pages, and then also you're getting information now from these third parties, delivery services that can also share or provide insights or details. That's often a negotiation. That's something that they want to be able to sell to the brand and to the stores. But there's more information available than there used to be, which means there's opportunities now to actually get to understand your customers that didn't exist before. But as we were saying before, the challenge is I've got an online profile. Maybe that doesn't match. I maybe have like my Yahoo email address for my online profile that I use on my browser, but maybe I used my Profisee address for the profile I set up on my phone. Well, how do I understand those different transactions across those different platforms when I've actually set up multiple IDs? I'm one of those people that marketers and retailers hate. It's like, I'll just set up a new profile before I try to go recover a password. Right? It's like, that's a pain in the butt trying to recover a password. I'll just use one of my other emails and set up a new profile. Well, now I've got multiple profiles. How do I reconcile that to get visibility, to do analytics and marketing and understand my customers and how are they responding to pricing changes and promotions? That's critical information. It's available now more than ever because of the shift to online apps, these third-party services, delivery services, and mobile. But you've got to be able to reconcile it and make sense of it, right? You've got to somehow unravel that Gordian knot of data that is being sourced from multiple external sources that you don't have control over. You can't prevent me from creating another profile, right? There's no way to make that not happen, right? And you don't want to prevent me from creating because you want me to just set up another profile and order some food. I don't want to prevent the consumers, make it too hard to do business. And so that's one of the big headaches is that now we've got this opportunity, but I've got to unravel this data that's streaming in from different service providers that all may have different data quality levels, different formats. I've got my own systems, but there may be duplicates and there may be differences between online and mobile apps. And then ideally, I need to link all of that to in-store activity, right? And sometimes you can do that through loyalty or you scan a number, you put in your phone number. And the other thing is interesting, some of the stores that I'm working with, or brands that I work with, they want to have even better visibility. A lot of people aren't going to put in a loyalty ID at a point of sale. They'll actually hash a credit card. So it's a one-way encrypted hash. Use that as an ID because now I can see, hey, that credit card for Christopher's mobile app is the same one he just swiped at a store. And so even though he didn't enter anything about loyalty, I know Christopher was in Alpharetta last week and went to some quick service restaurant.
Yeah. So what you're starting to talk to at a very high level is, what could loosely be called marketing effectiveness or marketing promotions or promotional effectiveness, right? Like making sure that you have the same Christopher, whether that is the professional Christopher persona or whether that is the personal Christopher persona. And maybe there's even another persona out there, who knows, right? But tying the work email to the personal email to a broader household to activity to transactions. Point of sale systems are notoriously bad from a data quality perspective.
Yes.
But how do you put all of that together to have this kind of holistic view of who you're doing business with and who you want to do business with? Because when it comes time to try to market to those folks, if you think that there's 3 Christophers and there's really only one, that's a marketing effectiveness problem. Agreed?
Absolutely. And of course, now in order to do that kind of marketing effectiveness, we're talking about having to be able to churn and chew through a ton of data and a ton of activity, right? So this is no longer, MDM is not going to be mastering individual transactions coming off a point of sale, but we are going to be scraping off things like that hashed credit card number or the loyalty number that's put in. All of those details now have to be scraped, put into something like now, modern days. We used to say data warehouses, but now everybody's putting it into their lakehouse architecture, and they're putting it into Fabric, or they're putting it into Databricks. And now they want to be able to churn through that data, leverage AI to get these understandings and insights and see, hey, how are different new items performing? How are different promotions performing? How is that performing regionally? All of that stuff is critical to marketing effectiveness for quick service restaurants. But as you said, if the foundational data is a mess, those insights are going to be skewed. It's like me when I get up in the morning and I put on my glasses for the first meeting of the day, and it's like, man, I can't read anything because my insights are being skewed by all of this garbage on the lenses.
Or it could be your age. I don't know. But
well, I got to have the glasses, but they got to be clean, right? If I've got a bunch of garbage on my glasses, I'm not going to be able to see clearly. And the same's true. It doesn't matter how clever your AI scripts are, what kind of the Python libraries you're using, how smart your data scientists are. If the core foundational data that's flowing into that lakehouse architecture is, 20% garbage, there's just no way to get actionable insights or reliable, trustworthy insights, regardless of the power of AI.
Well, and this is so great segue into AI, into our final kind of topic here. There is so much opportunity for quick serve restaurants to automate. And we're already seeing this. This is not a new trend. This is already happening. I mean, there are plenty that have automated the front office, the front of the house. There are plenty that are starting to automate the back of the house. I get it. But the way that I look at AI is that, the kind of the cost of being wrong here from a data perspective and an efficiency perspective, I think starts to magnify a little bit. Because for so long, if there was squishiness in the data, if there was ambiguity in the data, a human being could look at something and, infer or deduce, oh, well, I think this is this or this or that. Or I'll pick up the phone, I'll call somebody. I could make a call on the fly because I have advanced reasoning and deduction skills because I'm human still. But when you start automating a lot of these processes, you better have your data nailed down because machines don't do well with ambiguity, right? Machines don't do well with not knowing if this is A or if this is B, or if this is Acme Inc. and Acme LLC, or one thing or two things from a supplier perspective. So when we talk about automation within quick serve restaurants, to me, it seems to just turn up the dial on data accuracy and data consistency and data reliability, unlike anything we've seen in the past. Do you agree?
Yeah, I feel like the way I understand how I'm interpreting what you're saying, and I do agree, is that the ability of AI to collect, infer, and produce information results and aggregate information results beyond what we used to do just for traditional analytics is absolutely has amazing potential. But I feel like, as you're talking about, the impact of data quality has an exponential impact on the effectiveness of AI. So if my data is 90% good, I might get this much benefit. If I take my data to 95% good, I'm going to get this much benefit. So this is not a linear improvement, right? If I actually improve my data a little bit, it has like a multiplying effect on the accuracy and trustworthiness of the AI results. And so, the more and more you can move that needle even a little bit on the input data that's coming from all of these systems that is often inconsistent or incomplete or duplicated, the more I can move that needle even a little bit, the effects are multiplied by AI. And so, to me, that's if you're in a high demand, tight margin, high volume, high velocity business like quick service, being competitive and growing your market share is going to require that little bit of movement in data quality, because that's going to give you that exponential leverage on insights, ways to further optimize your supply chain, ways to optimize your menu. Hey, maybe we don't have to use this super expensive saffron in this particular dish. I don't think there's a lot of saffron in quick service.
Mediterranean restaurants, maybe.
Yeah. But those are the kinds of insights that these business models demand. And it's just incredible how a small change in the quality of that input data, I feel, is multiplied in terms of the effectiveness and accuracy of AI insights.
Well, for the better and for the worse, right?
Yes, so it'll move down. You move the needle back.
Exactly. So turning the dial on being a little bit more effective, being a little more efficient, on saving 5% on the cost of raw materials. Those things are all really, really good. But on the downside, you are talking about putting things inside people's bodies, right? And if you get an ingredient wrong, if you get an allergen wrong, because you don't have that foundation of strong master data management, if you don't have a common definitional layer, if you don't have a common quality layer, things can magnify on the downside as they can magnify on the upside. So I'm not trying to give the kind of the fear-driven approach here, but when you talk about automation, there are some things that you absolutely positively need to get right, where the cost of being wrong could be disastrous. And this is where a solution like an MDM comes into play, because you can overlay on top of your data. You can put a human in the loop on reviewing a specific ingredient. Is this data accurate? Is it not accurate? That's where MDM will play an important role to inject a human in the loop in some of these kind of core foundational data assets that are shared across your organization. So it's been a great chat. Right? What have we missed?
I'm doing that real quickly, though, Malcolm, just because I think it's like an example for quick serve. Some things you're going to let automation handle it. But let's say that corporate gets notification that a supplier of a particular ingredient has a change to allergen information. There's a new allergen in one of the ingredients you're buying. You don't want to just hope for the best and propagate that out and send that out to all of your restaurants. Somebody needs to look at that and check. You need to have accuracy already in your master data to go figure out, well, which restaurants are serviced by that specific supplier. I need to validate that. There is a time when you need somebody to look at something, and something as critical as a change to an allergen. I want to have somebody look at it. I want human eyeballs on that to make absolutely 100% sure that, hey, I'm getting this right. So there is always going to be a time for a human in the loop.
Yeah, exactly. TD, this has been a great chat. If you are a data professional within a quick serve restaurant, I hope you have found this insightful. I hope you join us. CD, I think we're going to be at an event in Atlanta upcoming. Are we not? Are you familiar with that?
I believe so. We have so many events, Malcolm. I have to go look at my cheat sheet. I can't even remember them all off the top of my head.
Well, this is an evergreen podcast. So, I mean, being date specific, I think that's kind of like, breaking a best practice when it comes to podcasts when you're talking about one specific date in time. Right. There's plenty of quick serve restaurant events that are coming up. And I hope that you watch this before so you can go to one of these events and be well informed about some of the questions you should be asking. We look forward to seeing you at some of these events. Profisee is deeply committed to data excellence when it comes to quick serve restaurants. So if you found this helpful, if you found this insightful, please consider subscribing to the CDO Matters podcast. Please consider connecting with both myself and Mr. Christopher Dwight on LinkedIn. We would be thrilled. And with that, we'll see you on another episode of the CDO Matters podcast sometime soon. CD, thanks for your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, and bye for now.